Hello, welcome to Buzzing with Cousin Talk. I'm your host, Cousin Johnny. How's everybody doing today? Yeah, did anybody? I just want to. We got a great show here, a great guest. He's been on a few times. But before I introduce the guest, I want to shout out to an organization and person in an organization. Did anybody get a chance to go to that Rock and Rod Festival? It was, if you did, you really were in for a treat. And if you didn't, well, maybe next year you can come back, try it again. But it was really great. Music, classic cars, people were out and about having fun, dancing. It was really great to see. And I want to shout out to Terry Wecker, the organizer, chairman of the Rock and Rod Festival. This is the 14th year. It takes a lot of work to put an event like this on. Organizing the cars, bands, auction or silent auction, regular auction. I mean, it's a big task. But anyway, I'd like to thank Terry, the Rock and Rod Festival, all his volunteers that worked really hard to get this thing going. And in fact, they're working on it right now for next year. So, but anyway, it's people like that in the community that we got a great community here. And thank you, Terry, and all your volunteers, your wife, Angela, for putting this together. And it all went to a cause, a great cause, the Gateway Center of Monterey Peninsula. So thank you, everybody, for bringing that to us. It was fun. Okay, so let me introduce our guest. Our guest has been on a few times, and everybody really enjoys him. And he's a historian. And today we're going to talk about basking sharks in Monterey, the fishery, because there were, back in the day, there were quite a few basking sharks here in the bay. And but anyway, before I'd like to introduce our guest, please welcome historian Tim Thomas.
Hey, hello, Cousin Johnny.
Tim, good morning. How are you? Or
I'm good, thank you.
good afternoon, I should say. But thank you for coming on again. And
My pleasure.
I just want to let you know that, us history buffs here in Monterey, we really appreciate you coming on and just telling us about the history of this great area that we live in, the Monterey Peninsula. And today you're going to talk about, when you said you were going to talk about this, I said, what? Basking sharks, Monterey fishery? I never heard of it.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't. It was a unique little fishery that was that went on for a number of years, actually, here in Monterey. So basking sharks are the second largest fish in the world. Whale sharks are the largest. And basking sharks, there was a time when they would come into the bay in the spring. They used to come here. They're filter feeders. They don't have any teeth. And they would come in the bay by the hundreds in the spring. And they were actually a nuisance to the Monterey sardine fishermen and other fishermen because they get caught up in their nets and stuff.
Wow.
And so they tried to do different things to get rid of them. And the fishery really was created actually by Popper Nestolter, the abalone king, and a friend of his, a blacksmith named Henry Leppert. And Pop had his own abalone boat. And so he'd promote his restaurant. They started taking tourists, mainly from the Hotel El Monte, out on Pop's boat. And they would charge people 50 cents to ride on the boat, and you could harpoon a basking shark.
Wow.
In those days, there were a number of old basking shark fishermen, old Portuguese whalers still living in Monterey. from the 19th century. Those guys are still alive at that time, and they would go out with them and show these guys how to throw the harpoons, and they would tell stories of whaling on the Monterey Bay. At that time, they weren't really doing anything with these sharks after they killed it, and they would would actually throw the harpoon, and then once they did that, the sharks would oftentimes drag the boat because they were big animals.
Right.
Then finally, when it would slow down, they would actually kill it with a shotgun. That's how they did it. It was pretty messy, pretty wet when they did that. But because Pop's boat had an air compressor on it for the abalone divers, oftentimes they would pump the carcass of the shark with air so it wouldn't sink and flip it onto its belly. And then Henry Leppert would get on the belly of the shark and dance on it.
Wow, that's amazing, Jim. I got a photo here. I want to show our viewers here just the magnificent size of these creatures. Here we go.
There you go. Yep, yeah.
That's
an early picture.
That's gigantic.
They're big animals. This was taken out of the early part of the 20th century, and the guy down there on the tail with the hat. And that's a guy named Louis Perez. Louis Perez was then known as the Fish King. And he was such a good fisherman, he used to hold dinners at the Hotel Del Monte selling stock into his fishing company.
Wow, that's really great. What do you think brought him in? Was it the warm water, or what do you think it was?
It was krill. They were feeding. So in the spring, there's a lot of krill in the water, I guess, and they were coming in to feed.
And so they're like kind of disappeared, or you see one every now and then?
Yeah, they don't come in big numbers anymore. They'll come in, one or two of them. People will see them out there. I actually have never seen one out there, but I know they do come in. I ask the captains who run those whale watching boats periodically if they see them out there, and they do. They say from time to time.
Wow, that is really. I got another photo I'd like to show also. Here we go.
That's a little bit later. So the basking shark fishery started out sort of a touristy thing with Pop Ernest, and then in 1925, the two brothers, the Gilkeys, they started a basking shark sort of trip. They'd take folks out, and they would charge 25 cents to harpoon the shark. And they would actually, once the shark was killed, they would actually ride on it. They'd jump on it, and they would ride on the shark as it's dragging the boat. Yeah. Basking shark skin is like little teeth. It literally tear up the legs of the guys when they did that.
So now can you eat that basking shark? I mean, is it a delicacy or?
No, really much to eat there, I don't think. So no, but what was after the oil in the livers is what was important. So beginning about 1926, 2027, a guy by the name of Max Schaefer, who was actually in the reduction business. He had a reduction plant initially on Cannery Row and then moved it across the bay over to where the Monterey Beach Hotel is today. He began to buy these sharks. He was mainly after the oil and the livers, and those livers can be huge, and they can have 600, 700 gallons of sort of a low-grade vitamin A inside them. And they're producing this stuff called sun shark liver oil.
Wow.
And it was sort of being advertised as that it would cure anything that ailed you. And it was really being sort of the Viagra of its day is what it was being advertised. But truth is, it probably didn't really do anything.
Basking shark, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Basking shark oil.
And then actually what happens is, of course, there was a demand for it beginning because of Max Schaefer's purchases of it. He was also grinding up for dog and cat food. That's what was happening with it. And they were, a fishery really developed over that. I was never making any money at it, but they were really beginning to go after it.
Yeah, so they used part of the shark for different things.
Right. Well, that initial fishery died out before 1930 when Max Schaefer's plant burned to the ground. And the focus shifted to soup fin shark. That was another one, which is a different story. It was the basking shark fishery was revitalized in 1948 by a guy named Freeman Whitey Arbo. Whitey Arbo was a fisherman off in Moss Landing, and he was out fishing for rockfish, and he saw a couple of basking sharks out there, and he caught them and brought them in to Moss Landing, and Newt Hovden of Hovden's Cannery had a cannery. Yeah. He had a cannery in Moss Landing at that time. He said, "Hey, I could do something with those." He began to buy them, again mainly for dog and cat food, and then he was after the oil. But what he discovered was they put the oil in. They use it to sell to paint manufacturers and soap manufacturers. When they put the oil in the soap wouldn't lather. They put it in the paint wouldn't dry. But it was really good for tanning leather, and that's pretty much what it was used for.
Okay, so tanning leather, yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and these guys are harpooning these things. That's what they did. And Whitey told me that he went out and had a couple of harpoons made, and I have one somewhere, one of his harpoons that he had made. And he said he took it out one day and he tossed it into the shark, and it just bounced right off of it. It was the skin is so thick. They had to use these specialized points to do that.
It was pretty much an entertainment for them to go out and have tourists go out and harpoon.
Yeah, that was initial, and they stopped doing the tourist thing in the 40s. But it never made a lot of money. You weren't going to get rich hunting basking sharks.
Yeah. Now, how big was the boat that they went on?
Those are pretty good sized boats. They were 30, 40-foot sized boats.
Wow, that is really that I've lived in Monterey all my life, and I've never heard of that fishery.
Yeah. It was active. There were fishermen that came up from the Monterey Bay area. Would come up every year to hunt basking sharks in Monterey Bay, and then the Monterey guys would go down that direction because there's sort of a shift in the fishery. It'll move to the southern part of California, and they'll go down fishing down there. They also instituted a couple of things. So Monterey basking shark fishermen used to use pilots who would fly up over the Monterey Bay, and they would look for the sharks, and then they would radio down to the boats where they could find them. And that's a method of finding fish that the sardine fishermen began to use beginning in the 1940s.
I can see where the sardine fishermen would be, the basking shark would be the enemy. I mean, because they're in the nets and destroying them.
Yeah. Well, there was a movie made in Monterey called "I Cover the Waterfront."
Yeah.
It made 1932, and a movie was about a corrupt fisherman, a tuna fisherman, who was smuggling in Chinese laborers into California inside the bellies of sharks. And so the film company needed to get scenes of these sharks, and so they knew that Monterey had an active basking shark fishery at that time, and so they sent a film crew up to Monterey, and they hired Sal Coletto, who was a sardine fisherman at that time. It wasn't a basking shark fisherman. They hired him in his boat, the Dante Alighieri. He paid him a lot of money. It was right after the sardine season. It closed, and it was during the Depression. So he could use that money. And so they hired him for about a week, and they went out hunting basking sharks. And they worked with a basking shark fisherman who was a harpoonist, and they harpooned a number of sharks for the movie. Yeah, and if you can see that film today. It pops up periodically. And in that film, the harpoonist that they used was actually a son and grandson of old Portuguese whalers. And it's the closest thing you'll see to a Portuguese whaler in Monterey Bay. It's really pretty amazing film to see. And in the movie, they actually put teeth on these sharks, so they don't really have any. So after the film was completed in Monterey, they realized they had so many shots of Sal's boat that they had to hire him to take the boat down to Hollywood, actually, to sail down to Santa Monica, and so they could film other parts of it. And plus, they had them bring down these basking sharks. And that went on for a number of weeks, and they hadn't been paid and he has to get, and he has to pay his crew. Again, it's during the Depression. And
Yeah.
finally, they were able to. He went in to get the check, and he went in one afternoon, got the check, said, "I'll wait till the next day to bring it to the bank." And of course, the next day was the day that Franklin Roosevelt closed all the banks because of the Depression.
Oh
So he
man.
wasn't able to cash that check right then.
Wow, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
Tim, uh, is there any other unusual fisheries that popped up that you know of during that era?
Well, sure. There was always, kelp was another fishery in Monterey that was fairly active. It was bull kelp. Bull kelp was the predominant kelp in Monterey Bay at that time. Those of you who don't know, bull kelp is that big single strand kelp you'll often find on the beach.
Right.
Washed up there. And at that time, bull kelp was the predominant kelp in Monterey. And there was an active kind of kelpery for it. And these guys in the spring again, they would go out and they would cut it. These big long poles had knives on the end of it, and they would cut the kelp, and then they would bring it in and they would sell it. There was a guy in New Monterey that was buying it, and they weren't making much money. I think it was 5 cents a pound or something like that. It really wasn't very much at all. And they're grinding it up and then shipping it back east where they extract these chemicals out of it. It was being used at that time to make and dyes for synthetic silk. That's what it was being used for.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I remember a few years back, I used to see guys collecting kelp in the.
yeah. There was still do, but there was a big company from San Diego that used to come up with those big ships, those big kelp cutters, and they were cutting kelp. They were allowed to take so much of it. And of course, kelp is used, they get algin out of it, and algin is used to do all kinds of things. All of us use it ourselves every day. So algin is used, it's kind of like a preservative in some ways, but it's used in toothpaste and ice cream. It's what gives a beer, it gives it that head, a beer. People like to get that. It really comes from algin that comes from kelp.
Okay, yeah. I'll have to remember that when I.
Yeah.
Nice ice cold beer.
Yeah.
That's great. Tim, I want to let you go. I know you're busy, and we really appreciate every time you come on and enlighten us with the history of Monterey. Now, can you talk about your tour that you do? You do a tour.
Well, I do a walking tour of the Monterey Wharf, which I do once a month, always on the first Sunday of every month.
First Sunday of every month, and
right.
What time is the tour?
It starts at 10 o'clock, and it goes for about 2 hours.
Okay, so you meet in front of the wharf?
You meet in front of the Harbor House, right in front of the wharf. The Harbor House, that pink building with the blue lighthouse on the roof.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I encourage the listeners to take advantage of, find a first Sunday of the month, one of these months.
I will be giving a tour on the 4th of July, so.
And really enlighten yourself and learn about the history of Fisherman's Wharf, and it's really
a history of that neighborhood. So it's a real cultural history of the Monterey waterfront.
Kind of like the lower Spaghetti Hill area.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, Tim. Fantastic.
All right.
I'm going to let you go, my friend, and we appreciate everything you do in Monterey. And have a great
my pleasure.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Was that good?